to planning board meeting for the city of New Brunswick. Tonight we'll start with a roll call.
Peter Checo. Dale Vickers. Here. Claire Barber. Chris Delatella. John Petrolino.
Here.
Manuel Castaneda.
Here.
Bob Cardica.
Here.
Nicole Burgos. Suzanne Ludwig.
Here.
David Henry.
Here.
Jeff Brum.
Here. Thank you. Public announcement.
Please be advised that notice requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been complied with and satisfied that the annual notice will be sufficient notice of the time, place, and conduct of all public meetings of the planning board of the city of New Brunswick has been filed with the city clerk and placed on an appropriate bulletin board in the lobby of City Hall, 78 Byer Street, New Brunswick, New Jersey, and has been transmitted to the official newspapers of the city of New Brunswick, namely the Home News Tribune and Star Ledger.
Thank you. Let's please stand to salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Minutes from the November 13th, 2017 meeting.
Mr. Chairman, members received copies of the board minutes from the November meeting in their packets. Unless you have any changes or additions to the minutes, a motion to approve would be in order.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are good.
Now, communications and reports, resolutions of memorialization.
Mr. Chairman, the first one's for Raritan, New Brunswick. The application due last week. You received copies of the resolution. Unless you have any changes on that, a motion to approve would be in order. Moved.
Second.
John Petrolino.
Yes.
Manny Castaneda.
Yes.
Bob Cardica.
Yes.
Suzanne Ludwig.
Yes.
David Henry.
Yes.
Jeff Brum.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't catch you made the motion on that one.
John.
Now, the second resolution is for Highway Hospitality, NB LLC.
Again, Mr. Chairman, members received copies of the resolution for your review, and you don't have any changes, a motion to approve would be in order. Motion to approve.
John Petrolino.
Yes.
Manny Castaneda.
Yes.
Bob Cardica.
Yes.
Suzanne Ludwig.
Yes.
David Henry.
Yes.
Jeff Brum.
Yes. Moving on to new business, we have one application tonight, the Standard at NB LLC, PB 2017-07. This is for a site plan and variance application for the construction of a multifamily residential building located at 90 U Street. This is block 129, lot 5.01, zoning district C4, downtown redevelopment.
Yes, members of the board, Thomas F. Kelso on behalf of the applicant, the Standard at New Brunswick LLC. We're pleased to be before you this evening for, as the chair has indicated, preliminary and final site plan and variance approval to develop a 21-story mixed-use building which will contain approximately 2,000 square feet of commercial space along New Street, 186 residential dwelling units consisting of 23 studio units, 62 bedroom units, 4 3-bedroom units, 58 4-bedroom units, and 41 5-bedroom units. A structured parking garage containing a minimum of 100 vehicle parking spaces and 100 bicycle spaces is also proposed. The property, as was indicated, is located in the Downtown Development District Renewal Area, and the proposed development is a permitted use within the Downtown Development District Redevelopment Plan. The applicant is the designated redeveloper for the project. The developer and ourselves had appeared before the redevelopment authority back a number of months, reviewed the concept plan with the redevelopment authority. They did approve the designated redeveloper designation for my client, as well as we have executed a redevelopment agreement towards that end. At the same time, the redevelopment authority approved what you're going to see tonight as a project as a concept plan. We are seeking just 2 variances and 2 design waivers. The first variance is an existing condition. Because of the configuration of the lot, there is a lot depth variance required. There's a 100-foot minimum. The existing lot only has an 84-foot depth. And that is an existing condition, was actually a condition that's been approved previously. We also have a parking variance in that there is a requirement for 301 parking spaces for the project. We are proposing a minimum, as indicated, of 100 spaces in the garage, but as testimony will show, we've also received a commitment from the Brunswick Parking Authority for up to 150 spaces in the Morris Street garage. And if, for board members who have been here previously for a previous project approved here, this is a similar arrangement that was previously approved for a prior project. We also have two minor design waivers. The first is for the dimensioning of a number of the parking spaces in the garage from 9 by 18 to 8.5 by 18, which is pretty common that we see in most of the garages in New Brunswick. We also have a design waiver for the access aisle width from 24 feet to 22 feet. And so that really, other than for the site plan approval, is what we will be seeking. I think it is of interest for you to know that this is actually the third project that's come before this board for approval as a redevelopment project. There was originally a project approved in 2009, which approved a 25-story residential building with 166 residential units. Unfortunately, the market changed after that approval. That project was never able to successfully move forward, and the owners, prior redevelopers, had come in 2014 and had a second project approved, lowering the building to 22 stories, 234 residential units, and again, with a similar arrangement with the parking authority. Through the process of identifying equity participants, as typical for projects like this, ultimately what occurred is that the Landmark company, which is based in Athens, Georgia, has come forward and is now the contract purchaser for this property for this project. This project is intended to be marketed primarily to undergraduates of Rutgers University. You'll see in testimony with regard to the design of the interior units is really geared to what's the state-of-the-art market for that type of housing. Landmark Properties is actually one of the national leaders in the development of that type of housing. So the metamorphosis of going through to 3 projects has brought us here today to hopefully be the one that's going to actually be constructed and developed. And I did all 3 of those applications, so I am familiar with them. My intent is to call 6 witnesses. Even though 6 sounds like a lot, I think some of the testimony will be fairly quick. First of all, I will call Mr. Jason Nornbos, who is a representative of Landmark Properties. Mr. John Trieber, who is our architect, who will provide architectural testimony. Mr. Christian Roach, who is our civil engineer, who I know you've heard from previously. Mitch Karen, the executive director of the Parking Authority. I've asked to come this evening to confirm the commitment that's been made by the Parking Authority to the project. Mr. Charles Olivo, who I know you've heard before, is our traffic consultant and our professional, and also Mr. Greg Woodruff, who will wrap things up as our professional planner. As an overview, I think it's an exciting project. We'd like to think that now, after so many years, that site, as you know, which is located between where the Marsh Street Garage is and the church, and the back of the Elks, will finally get its place in the redevelopment arena here. With that as an overview for the project, unless the board has any questions for me, I would call my first witness. And that would be Mr. Jason Nornbos.
Can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please?
Jason Dornbos, D-O-O-R-N-B-O-S.
And you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
I do.
Jason, you are a representative of the applicant, is that true?
Correct.
And in that capacity, you are familiar with the project?
Yes.
And I believe your title, you're the Executive Vice President of Development of Landmark Properties?
Correct, yes.
If you could please, I think the board would be interested to know, to give us a general overview of the project from the developer's perspective. It helps us to get an idea of what your vision for the project is. And I think it's also helpful if you give the board a little bit of background on Landmark and who you are, where you're from, and what you do, more
Sure.
than what I just indicated.
Yeah, and so I'll just start, just going to give you a background on myself. And as Tom mentioned, a developer for Landmark Properties. So my role at Landmark is really to go around the country. We specialize in student housing, so we're looking in university markets, West Coast, East Coast, everywhere in between, finding markets that we feel there's a strong demand from students, and we feel like New Brunswick has, especially over the past 3 to 5 years, really seen a tremendous growth in demand for the type of housing, this purpose-built student housing. So I've been with Landmark for 7 years, and then kind of at Landmark, my role is to really, in addition to identifying the sites, quarterbacking the team of professionals, architects, engineers, consultants that we're kind of going through designing this project up to the point where we start construction, and then really we kick it off to our construction partner. As Tom mentioned, we specialize in multifamily development in university communities. We're the largest, we've been classified as the largest developer of student housing in the United States for 2 of the last 3 years, so we're doing a lot of these. It's really our specialty. We feel like we do a really good job with this product type. We do two different products. We do a low density kind of garden style, we call it cottage style, they're like little houses. And then what we're proposing here, which is more of an infill location, where we're doing a high rise, we'll do mid rise too, but anything with like a structured parking deck, I mean, it's vertical. We brand that, the cottage style, the retreat, and then our infill product, we brand as the standard. So, again, our projects target the student housing market. We do amenities that really cater to that demographic. We do a lot of study rooms. We try and do it in a cool way, where we'll do like a Starbucks machine and kind of have the study room kind of configured so that they feel like they're at a coffee bar studying and not like in a library. And we'll have groups, study rooms, computer labs where they can go in and work on reports and in groups that they're working with on class. Then we'll do state-of-the-art fitness centers. That's something that's extremely important to the residents that are living in these projects. They want a lot of, cardio, weights, just you name it. We'll do yoga studios, spas. A lot of times we'll put in tanning beds, which we're proposing to do here. Those types of amenities that are very attractive to the student renter. And then there's a lot of positives with this type of, they've been well received in the communities, and there's several reasons. One is, what you see in a lot of college towns is that the universities have grown, they've kind of maxed out on their on-campus housing, so what it's done is it's kind of pushed the students out into the single-family neighborhoods that weren't really designed for that type of user. So what we've seen is these projects, they pull a lot of those students out because these are marketed, designed. We are going out and finding these renters and trying to get them to live in our project. So they pull a lot of those renters out of the single-family neighborhoods, and then they concentrate those residents in a property where we can have on-site property management and leasing to kind of handle any specific needs and concerns of that type of renter versus being a smaller project where you've got off-site property management. We obviously provide a meaningful contribution to the tax base. And what we're doing is, in a lot of areas, is redeveloping sites that either are underutilized or even blighted, like the property here that we're developing is kind of a couple of boarded up houses. So I think it'll be a nice change for that. We've developed over 22,000 beds in markets around the country, and so that's given us a lot of experience to address in a practical way concerns and anticipate those concerns from the community and incorporate those into the design and management of the properties. And I think you've kind of already mentioned what the specifics are of this project. I don't know if you want me to run back through those.
Well, can you talk a little bit about the management with Landmark's management profile?
Yeah, so we've got an in-house property management group, which is great for us as a developer because we're getting real-time feedback from them on what the students want and need, and are incorporating into the design elements on the front end as we're designing these projects. And then we'll have a large part of the area, the building is going to be designated to have offices for the management company, leasing space for them so that when residents come in off the street, they can educate them about the process, sign leases, kind of show them the different unit types. We'll have a lot of different unit layouts, so there's roommate matching, there's different price points, really kind of cater to different rental profiles and really kind of target that student housing earner.
I have no further questions for Jason. Any issues to direct him?
Not all of the residents here are targeted towards students,
Yeah,
obviously, right?
That's a good point.
How's
Yeah.
that gonna work?
So we actually, we don't have all students typically in our projects. Fair housing will prevent you from being able to say only students. So
I get that, but how are the folks who are renting 5-bedroom apartments can coexist with
yeah,
students?
that's a great point. So what we've done on this project is we've put the 5 bedrooms on the lower levels, and we've kind of separated on the building where the 2 and 3 bedroom units are, so that they're on the top, and so that they can kind of have a natural separation between the two.
When, just so there's an understanding, when we say 5-bedroom, it's 5 people occupancy, correct? Because those are all single-person bedrooms.
Correct.
And that's basically the model of which Landmark is following throughout the country, and others, I think,
Yeah.
with the state-of-the-art suites, where the bedrooms are one individual. But we'll have the architect talk a little bit more. Any other questions? Thank you, Jason. At this time, I have a call Mr. John Trevor for testimony.
Can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please?
John Treber, Treber.
And you swear to the matter?
I do.
Mr. Trevor, you are not a licensed architect in New Jersey, is that correct?
I am not a licensed architect in New Jersey. I'm a licensed architect in 4 other states and have an NCARB certificate that allows me to get a license in any other jurisdiction. For this project, our founder and principal, Jack Borman, will be the one who will be signing the drawings.
So all of the plans, architectural plans in detail are signed and sealed by Mr. Borden, is that correct? Is that correct? I would offer Mr. Treber as a witness for purposes of being able to describe the architectural components of the building.
Mr. Chairman, he's not being proffered as an expert in the field of architecture, but the board can certainly accept the testimony as explanation of the architectural details or the architectural features of the building.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much. We're very proud to be presenting this project. This is a 21-story student housing, as Jason and Tom have mentioned.
Mr. Treber, I'm sorry
yes.
to interrupt. If we could just mark that as A1.
Absolutely.
On a rendered perspective, or?
Yes, this is a rendered perspective off of New Street. This shows the retail element, the lobby for our residential, entrance to the garage, the basic massing of our building, and we'll get into that in the next few boards. Coming up to the top 3 floors, which I think Jason mentioned, are geared more for market rate as an option. And then a 21st floor, a amenity space. So as I take the next board, which I will label as A2, this is actually perspectives around the building to give the whole view. Again, we have tried to use the architecture in a way that actually breaks down some of the mass. It is a big building. But as I believe Mr. Kelso has mentioned, it's smaller than previous projects that have been on the site. Cognizant of the fact that we are still sizable, what we've tried to do is set the building back in a number of floors. The 4th floor, the 6th floor here, up to the 18th floor and the 21st floor, we've actually gone around and moved some of their setbacks in the buildings to kind of break down the actual mass. Introduce board A3. This board is a perspective image of the view across the street from New Street, so that it gives an impression or gives a view of what the tenants across would actually see. And it's basically looking down to a outdoor amenity terrace off of the 4th floor, where we have external study areas and an outdoor space green area. And then the blue shaded area is the internal amenity that is primarily on this floor, fitness and study rooms. Move to board A4. This is the view at eye level off of New Street to give the impression of actually what we'd be looking at as you're walking toward the building. Again, the garage entrance, the lobby for the amenities, the retail portion, and above that, 3 levels of parking garage that we have endeavored to screen from public view by creating a vertical pattern of architecture. Behind that, based on the need to provide some kind of screening for garage ventilation, we're proposing to introduce a translucent panel so that we get the impression of light, but still screens the actual view of the automobiles behind it. And then getting to the board A5, which gets into our floor plans. Color coding, the turquoise represents the actual parking garage. Circulation is taking you into visitor parking. We have a roll-up gate and then up a ramp. The dark blue area is approximately our 2,000 square foot standalone retail. The magenta is our amenity space, and the tan is our building service. Here back is electrical room, front is fire service, and here is our 2 transformers that I believe Chris Roche will talk about in a minute. As we move up to the next floor, I reduced the scale of the drawings just because there's a number of floor plate types. Second floor is primarily garage. You come up the ramp, circulate back up to the 3rd floor, and that concludes basically the garage levels, 3 levels. Screen on all sides, and then, as I said, the translucent view or elevation off of New Street. As we get to the 4th floor, we start to get into our unit types. Our unit types range from studio to 5 bedrooms.
Before you, Mr. Chairman, on the parking deck floor plans there, can you explain how the bike parking is supposed to work? Because most of it seems to be on the upper level. I'm not quite sure how it's supposed to get there.
Yeah. We've tried to locate parking spaces for the bikes very near elevators. So the intent is, as you're actually parking the bike, you take your bike out the elevator and then take it up to your room if you so choose, or you lock it down at that location. We've got a larger area on the 3rd floor that we're actually looking to enclose with a fence, so that's more secure bike parking. We have, again, limited areas for bikes on the 1st floor, and that's basically based on the configuration of the services needed and the amenity and retail space, but we can certainly look at trying that and look for that.
Yeah, there's concern about people getting in there, you have to go through a couple of doors to take your bike up, and or the elevator's large enough to accommodate
Yes,
that.
they are, yeah.
How many doors would you have to go through with the bike?
Well, again, on the 1st floor, if I pull it back.
Like if you go through the one near the front in the lobby, there's 2 doors that you go through to get on the elevator, and then one when you're getting off. And
Correct.
the one that the elevator that's in the rear, there's a door when you go in, and then
The vestibule door and then the elevator door, yes. So the intent basically is people are going to come up here with their bike at the 1st floor, go through the vestibule door, go into the elevator, come up to whatever level they want to park their bike if it's not being parked in their unit itself, and lock it down there, and then use the elevators to get back to the 1st floor.
Does ask a technical point, those doors that they have to go through have the buttons that you usually have for the handicapped access?
Yes.
Just, it's difficult sometimes maneuvering a bike through
Agreed.
a doorway
Yes.
area.
You can absolutely do that.
John, while you're doing that, I just want to go back to your reference to the screening with regard to the parking garage. In Mr. Bignell's report, there's a reference to providing testimony with respect to compliance with the plan with regard to that, and is that in fact what the intent of the screening that you described in conformance with the plan?
Absolutely. If I can pull that one more back, actually. Shows, if you're actually looking toward the building itself, these gray areas are solid panels. So you're immediately limited in the amount of view you actually get into the garage. The lighter areas we're proposing is the area where the translucent screen is. So even as you look beyond that, based on the section here, translucent screen will be set back a little further for a depth approach. But as you're there, as you're looking back, the intent is that with that opacity of the screen, the view into the garage is very limited at all. But the intent is, from a design perspective, is not to make that a solid dark area. To provide some kind of light at those two levels. So.
All right, thank you.
As I said, our unit mix ranges from studio to 5-bedroom. So as we get again up to the 4th floor, we've got our 3 levels of amenity spaces. Primarily, the lobby area is more for service leasing. The 4th floor has the tanning, the exercise. As we move up to the next floors. And this is actually A7. Yes. The first image to the top left is the floor plan for the 5th and 6th floor. Again, the orange is representing the units. The 7th and 10th floor, we start to actually step back parts of the building. You can see here that this is now stepped back from the 5th and 6th floor. The 11th and 14th floor, just again, more units. Floor 8. 15 to 17. Again, additional units. There are slight variations on some of the setbacks, but primarily the units stack. As we get to 18 and 20, you can see that demising walls are a little more condensed in the fact that we're adding more units. And I think, as Jason mentioned, this is a push to open it up for more market rate users. It's a lower mix, single and 2-bedroom units, probably predominantly, versus the more intensive mix. Oops. And then we get to the amenity space on the top floor, 21st floor. We have study areas, more booth seating, a larger public space for congregation, a fire pit. Then we have an outdoor rooftop area that's congregated more to the internal kind of crook of the building, so that there is not any concerns of issues off of New Street. So the intent is that this is a kind of privatized amenity area.
So that'll be marked as A9?
Yes, sorry, that is A9. A10 is just a straight-on view of our colored rendering of New Street. Showing again our garage entry, our lobby, our retail, our garage screening, our amenity, and then the architectural treatment we're providing for the rest of the building, and then the setback for the market rate. Exterior materials are to be a combination of thin brick, precast, and metal cladding. This job is to be a panelized system, so we believe that will both enhance the speed of construction and also enhance the quality. So those are our primary architectural materials. As we get to the actual floor plans, this is just a range of some of the,
Those are part of the architecturals that have been submitted, is that
yes,
correct?
these are.
You don't need to mark those then.
You don't need to mark.
Okay. This is a mix of units from studio and one-bedrooms, to give a sense of what the typical layout is. The next is just a view of the range of the 4 and 5 bedrooms. The intent is that, as I believe Jason has mentioned, these are first-rate units, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. Most bedrooms have a bathroom, but not every one does. There's different ranges within the mix. But predominantly, the intent is if it's a 5-bedroom, generally it's 4 bathrooms at a minimum. This is,
A11?
this is oops. This is the view of the ground floor, again, colored just to show some of the garage screening and potential signage that we're looking to do, introduce the base areas. Actual signage, I believe, will be more determined when we have a retail tenant. So this is more for just graphic purposes.
On this, on that rendering, can you show me where the transform, you said there are 2 transformers?
There are 2 transformers right here as it stands. I think that's subject to utility concerns that we need to get some confirmation if that's acceptable, or if we're putting it there, putting it in a vault.
Okay.
But for right now, that's what we're showing.
And we're gonna,
We talk about that? Okay.
Yeah. And then the last drawing, which is also part of the original package, is just showing the garage floor plans and photometrics. So, can I,
I have no further questions for John? Or Jason?
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Jim. At this time, I will call Mr. Christian Roach for testimony.
Can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please?
Sure, it's Kristen Roach, R-O-C-H-E.
And you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
I do.
Chris, you are a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
I am.
In that capacity, you are familiar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Been here many times.
Been here too many
Yeah,
times.
I know. I realize, but I gotta do my thing.
So the good news is, as an engineer, I only brought one board, as opposed to the 410 that the architect brought.
Thank you.
I'll mark this as A12, this is just a site plan.
A12 for application. Ms. Roach, your qualifications since the last time that you appeared before this board have not changed in any way, is that correct?
Correct. So before we jump into the proposed development, I just want to give a real brief overview of the existing site conditions. The site's located at 90 New Street, Block 129, Lot 5.01. It's bound by New Street to the north, as well as the Heldridge to an existing church on the east side, the Elks Building, and some other commercial uses to the west and south. The site itself, it's a little less than half an acre. It's 0.45 acres, which is around 20,000 square feet. It's occupied right now by 2 existing buildings, which will be demolished as part of this application. So you've heard previously what we're proposing on site. It's a 21-story building, primarily occupied by residential units. There's 186 total units, and additionally there will be 2,000 square feet of ground floor retail. I'll start out with the parking. Based on the parking criteria in the city ordinance and the redevelopment plan, we'd be required, according to the number of units and according to the retail square footage, to have approximately 300 parking stalls to accommodate the development. We're proposing a minimum of 100 parking stalls within our building footprint across 3 levels of structured parking. And the reason I'm saying a minimum of 100 stalls, right now we're showing approximately 105 on our plans. However, we are working with Public Service, Gas and Electric on a transformer layout in the northeast corner of the site. And we just want to have a little flexibility if we were to lose some stalls based on their requirement not to have to come back to the board. So the number we're committing to tonight within our building is 100 parking stalls, and our traffic engineer, Mr. Levo, and Mitch Karen from the Parking Authority, we've secured 150 stalls next door in the garage to be a little bit more detailed to support that parking variance. From a circulation perspective, we're proposing access into and out of our garage along the eastern property line. The reason we're proposing this location, it provides the most distance from Livingston Avenue and New Street, the intersection. It just gives more visibility to cars entering and leaving the garage. When vehicles enter the garage, they can operate in a clockwise movement pattern. It was mentioned by Mr. Kelso that we are seeking 2 design waivers relative to the garage. The first is the proposed stall width. The code requires a 9-foot by 18-foot stall. We're proposing 8.5 by 18 feet. And the second is the drive aisle width. Code requires 24 feet, and we're proposing 22. The dimensions that we're proposing, the 8.5-foot wide stalls, 22-foot drive aisles, are quite common, especially in a low-frequency residential garage. It's not a retail use with high turnover at this point in time. So we feel they're appropriate, and we have done several garages in New Brunswick previously using these dimensions. Next thing I'll touch on is stormwater management. We did meet with some adjacent landowners relative to the grading. We walked the site together. What we're committing to tonight is that, based on our design, we are not directing any stormwater runoff to our adjacent neighbors. All of our runoff is going to be collected through a series of roof drains in our building. It'll be piped down vertically and eventually make its way to the New Street conveyance system. We're not subject to the city's water quantity or water quality requirements because we don't meet the definition of a major development. We're not increasing impervious coverage by more than 1/4 of an acre, nor are we disturbing more than an acre of land. Utility-wise, we are going to be served primarily, I should say primarily, we're going to be served entirely from New Street. That includes water service, which we've coordinated capacity with the city, as well as sanitary sewer service. And we're working our way right now through the gas and primarily the electric service with PSE&G. There's existing overhead lines which currently only feed the 2 buildings on our site to be abandoned. It's our desire, and I believe it's the city's desire as well, to have these above ground lines located below grade. We've met with PSE&G. They're going through the design process now to accommodate that request. What we're proposing and what we're hoping PSE&G can accommodate is a transformer location in the northeast corner of the site. Once that's finalized, we will be screening that location from the roadway so you don't walk by and just see these ugly transformers. We're spending a lot of money to make this building look very attractive. That's the last thing we want people to see.
What type of screening do you think you use?
The product that comes to mind for me is we had a really good, in my opinion, good product. We used at the yard on Union Street. It's kind of a, I don't want to say metal panel screen. That's when an engineer starts talking architectural terms. I can get you guys a photo of it. I can get Glad a photo of it. It's
That location's over on the Union Street side.
on the Union Street side. Yeah, it's not like a mesh or anything like that. It really is a full
Okay.
full blockage.
Okay.
One thing I did want to touch on that I missed when I was talking about site circulation. We are proposing an on-street loading area to accommodate the 2,000 square feet of retail in front of the site. And this is something we worked through with the city during a technical review process. We originally had a small loading area within our building, but the issue that caused was there was conflicts with pedestrian movements. We really want to avoid having a truck having to back in or back out onto New Street. We didn't like the potential pedestrian conflict in that area, so as we worked our way through with the city engineering department, we all came to the conclusion that we thought this was the best approach. A point about that though, it's a really limited use loading area. It's 2,000 square feet of retail. We're probably talking 1 box truck a day. All of the units within the residential portion of the building come pre-furnished. So it's not like the Rutgers moving where you have people parking moving trucks all over the site. It really is going to be a limited use area. The last thing I'll touch on is landscaping. There's not a ton of it because the building occupies 97% of the building site. We are proposing 3 new street trees along New Street as well as 3 new light fixtures. And these will be the standard PSE&G light fixtures that you see throughout the city.
I have no further questions for this.
Why hasn't the adequate number of parking spaces, or the required number of parking spaces been incorporated into the project itself?
The main reason is the standard requirements are based on RESIS, which is New Jersey Residential Site Improvement Standards. But those standards don't really take into account the location in New Jersey where you're located. So our traffic engineer will get a lot more detail, but given the mass transit options, the potential for this to be highly student occupied, the Rutgers bus network, we feel that we're providing an appropriate amount of stalls for our development. That in conjunction with the 150 parking stalls that the parking authority is committed to us next door, we feel it's the appropriate level of parking. And our traffic engineer will give you a little bit more thorough explanation as to some of the other mass transportation options.
Any other questions for Chris?
I'm not sure if you're the right person to address this question, but when I hear about overflow parking taking over 150 slots in the deck next door, you know, it makes me ask the question, what happens to the rest of the residents in New Brunswick? Where do they park?
No, I was about to call Mitch Karen, the Executive Director of the Parking Authority. I think he can address those kinds of questions. Thank you, Chris. We'll call Mitch Karen for testimony.
Can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for the record?
Rich Karen, K-A-R-O-N.
And you spoke the truth in this matter?
Yes, I did.
Mitch, you are the Executive Director of the Brunswick Parking Authority, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
How many years have you been doing that?
I've been with the Parking Authority for 22 years. I've been director for 18.
So in that capacity, you're familiar with the Mars Street Garage and I guess one of the parking garages in Brunswick, is that correct?
Something like that.
So I just would first, we provided as part of our application submission a copy of the letter that you provided to us committing up to 150 non-exclusive hourly parking spaces
Correct.
for this project. And
Hourly or
I'm
monthly?
sorry, monthly spaces. This is a commitment that had been done previously for the other approved projects, is that correct?
That's correct.
I think actually this is higher, this is actually 150 spaces.
It's a little bit
I
higher.
know that higher. I just, and again, anticipating some of the questions that the board has, if you could indicate to us, first of all, that this garage is capable of handling that, and then I think more specifically operationally, how does the parking authority view that? How do they interact with daily spaces and other monthly spaces from what your expectation is to lead to the conclusion as to how you're able to commit comfortably to
sure.
150 spaces?
Okay, well, basically, if you look at the Morris Street Garage on its own accord, currently during the peak hour, which is from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. during the day, the Tuesday through Thursday, basically we're averaging 600 cars at peak hour. The garage holds 824 vehicles. So right there we have a pad of approximately 75 spaces over the 150 we're committed. If you look at the overnight parking, which is mostly used by residents, we're averaging about 200 vehicles in the facility at any night of the week. What we're finding, though, over the years, we've made commitments to Rockoff Hall, we've made commitments to the George, over at the View, we're at the Gateway garages. These are all residential projects, and we've made commitments to parking. And what we're finding is that approximately of the units, not the bedrooms, of the units, we're getting about 50% demand for parking. So it's less than what we expected. I believe, I think, as Tom mentioned before, or maybe Chris mentioned it, was the fact that people were relying on mass transit, bicycles, if you will, the Rutgers bus system. So we're finding that demand from the residents not to be as great as we expected. And we probably expect the same thing here, especially dealing with students.
So based upon your experience with the Marsh Street Garage, the other buildings within the vicinity here, as well as the other parking facilities related to other residential developments in the town, you feel comfortable committing up to the 150 monthly spaces?
Absolutely.
For this, and you feel
Yes.
comfortable they can be accommodated both during peak hours, during the day, on weekends, and overnight?
I believe so, yes.
I have no
Just
further.
to clarify, you said 50% of what you anticipated for Rockoff and the View. What had you anticipated and what are you actually seeing?
Well, Rockoff, and I have some figures here that I jotted down. Rockoff, to give you an understanding, there's 186 units in Rockwell Fall, and there's actually 100 access codes that are currently out. And what we're finding, that's like 55%, but if you take 50%, 55, because it averages out between all the other residential projects in the city. And what we expected was at least 60%, and we're not getting that.
Okay.
Isn't this kind of akin to the city donating 150 kind of parking spaces to this project?
It's not, well, they will pay for the parking
They're
spaces.
paying the month, they'll pay
Yes.
monthly.
So that revenue would go to the parking authority?
That's correct.
We actually encourage this kind of use so that we're not building excess parking in the city. I think one of the problems this city, along with some other city, has is too many parking decks, which for a vast majority of the day aren't used all that much. I think one of the things that this city has done is based most of the parking in downtown on the public system, which allows multiple users to use it at different times of the day. Where, for example, if you go by the J&J World Headquarters right now, and they have one of those signs out, it's how many parking spaces available, you'll see it's about 750 parking spaces available out there, they're not being used. Whereas the Church Street deck is full all day with commuters, office users downtown, and then it's close to full, tonight with theater goers, restaurant goers, and so forth. So we'd like to have a mix of users. We actually encourage that. I mean, it's up for the board to determine whether what Mr. Karen is saying is persuasive or not as to the availability of it and so forth. But having a mix of uses in the parking deck is something that the city does encourage.
And there's precedent for this. This has occurred in several instances before, associated with these residential units.
Yes.
And actually, if we were to use Rockoff sort of as a close,
Yeah, that's right next door. It's basically, it's right next door to the garage. So I use that. The George, just to give you an idea, which is right across the street, the George has 104 units. We have 49 access codes, so that's 47%. So it's, it's not as high as what we expected.
and Rockoff's mostly students, and you're only seeing demand for 100 spaces there, so
Correct.
you're almost building on site.
No, sales, I don't make their case one or anything, but the George is more of a market rate one, where you would expect them to have more cars. They have no parking on site, so the only parking they have is at this deck, and you're still only seeing this amount of use.
Mr. Karen, just for the sake of completeness, to my question that I was going to ask Mr. Rowe, I understand that it sounds like certainly you've done your homework over the past 18 years, and I think you have probably a pretty good idea of what to anticipate, but of course, sometimes projections don't always line up with the reality that we wind up seeing. As I'm sure you know, we're doing a lot of development here downtown that, in my mind, is going to spur a lot of demand for access to this area. Not everybody can walk or bike like some of us can. If it turns out that there is an increase in demand that outstrips what's being provided, are there any contingencies that have been discussed with regards to the allotment that's being provided, not only previously but also to the current applicant?
Well, we have 7 parking garages throughout the city. When we make a commitment to monthly parkers, they're the priority. So basically, we keep track of how many monthly access cards at each facility. So we assure that those spaces are available for the monthly access cards. And then we use the overflow, if you will, of daily parking, and we move them to the different facilities that are available at the time. That's, if one facility should fill, then it's the daily parkers that we move, the hourly parkers we move. So we commit ourselves to these monthly parkers. I think is that the question you're asking?
Well, I think it's certainly part of it. I just want to make sure that, we're thinking towards, what happens next year, 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, as, the development projects in Brunswick start to take hold and to drive more business downtown, where, when we're talking folks from out of town who are not taking mass transit, if they're driving in, they want to find access and places to park, that we're able to accommodate the people who are paying for the slots on a monthly basis, but also that it's able to support people who are going to come down and revitalize or rejuvenate the economy.
So I just want to make sure that we've got a plan, not only for this project, but for the city going forward.
I think Glenn touched upon it also, is that you have that mixed use. So you have the people coming into the city at night. So people who work during the day are leaving. So you have the nighttime crowd coming in, basically filling in those spaces. And as I mentioned before, most of the garages are fairly empty overnight. When you're going to have the residents, that's when they're going to need the parking overnight.
Not the ones I get.
What's that?
Not the ones I get.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Let me ask you a further question, because I think part of what's also in the mix here is that the parking authority is now constructing a new garage of 300 and some odd spaces for the cultural center project on the other side of the Helge, is that correct?
That's correct.
And some of the users in that garage will be daytime monthlies, correct?
Correct. For the
And-
apartments.
So that will leave probably some of the parking that's now currently taking place in the Marsh Street garage, as well as accommodate the evening theater goers and restaurant goers that are more apt to use that garage in the evening. As a matter of fact, that's why that garage is being built for the use for the cultural center, is that correct?
That's correct, that's correct. And actually, while the garage is being built, we had to close the cultural center lot, which is 50 spaces there. So those people currently are parking at Morris Street, and we're still meeting that demand without problem.
And I think the point is, the parking authority, I think over the years, from my experience, has been good at moving around, anticipating, taking down the Wolfson, which was outdated, building a new garage right on the other side of the Heldridge to accommodate those users that today are in the New Street, or the Marsh Street garage. And there is a flexibility of this movement around. I think from my experience, since I handled many of the projects, the actual Marsh Street garage was built in anticipation of all of the parking that was coming out of Rockoff Hall, the George, and the Heldridge. And it has been underutilized based upon statistically what Mitch is indicating. And I think financially that is a burden on the parking authority. And I like to think that by bringing a project of this nature here next door, we actually are benefiting the parking authority because we're creating new revenue from a project adjacent to the Rockoff that originally was anticipated to fund and to fully utilize Rockoff, which it hasn't happened. So to a great degree, and in my recommendation to the client to seek this, is it's actually a benefit to the parking authority as well as Glenn's indicated, fulfilling the city's vision of not over-parking each of these projects and being left with unused spaces. And it seems to have worked so far, and I think that based upon Mitch's testimony, just looking at what the cultural center is doing, there's an ongoing process, and they adjust based upon what the needs are, and which is what's happened with the cultural center.
If anything, I see too much. But based on the statistics from the other two buildings. But, I mean, I guess better to have more spaces available than.
If there are no further questions for Mitch, move on. None? This time I have a call for testimony, Mr. Charles Oliva.
Can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please?
Certainly. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Charles Olivo, O-L-I, V as in Victor O.
And you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
I do.
Mr. Oliva, you're a licensed professional engineer of the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And I believe your specialty is traffic engineering?
That is correct, yes.
And in that capacity, you were asked to provide a traffic study and analysis for this project, is that correct?
I have, yes.
So we've been here many times, accepted.
Okay. And have your credentials changed at all since, I'll anticipate Marvin's question, since
They-
last time you were here?
They have not.
Then I would ask you if you could give us an overview of the charge that you had with respect to doing a traffic analysis for the project. Give us the benefit of how you went about that, and hopefully the benefit of your conclusions, recommendations. And I would ask you to then touch upon the parking discussion, if you will, that we just had, and to provide your expert opinion with regard to the amount of parking that's being provided. Both
Certainly.
on and off site.
Yes. Our firm was tasked with preparing a traffic impact study as well as a parking assessment of the proposed project, the standard at New Brunswick. And that starts with an existing inventory of the roadway conditions, the parking conditions that you have within this area. The exhibit that has been previously presented, which I'll refer to, the aerial exhibit showing the site plan with New Street running along the top of the page. We have analyzed the intersections of Livingston Avenue and George with New Street to understand how the traffic flow works throughout this roadway network that is most proximate to this redevelopment and infill site. And we've also generally observed the parking conditions within this area as well as the utilization within the parking decks. Now, certainly you've heard from Mr. Karen about the utilization of the parking garages, and he is the authority when it comes to parking, for lack of better phrasing there, but he is really looking at the metrics every day in terms of the parking utilization throughout these garages, and you would expect exactly what he presented, which is your peak utilization for commuters, employees that are parking within the garage and then utilizing the various destinations in the area happens right around midday during the weekday. And then overnight, which is when you typically have your longer or your highest utilization of residential accumulation, is happening during that overnight period. And generally speaking, that's what we've seen through our observations as well, which means you do have capacity within Morris Street Garage and other garages when it comes to residential peak parking demands. In terms of the traffic study that we conducted, and those findings have been summarized within the traffic impact study and submitted to the board and the board's professionals for review. Generally speaking, when you look at the volume associated with this project coming in and out of the full movement access point on New Street, the volume that's associated with this actual site is particularly associated with the 100 or so parking stalls that are proposed within the lot itself. And so when we look at the trips associated with this project, they will likely be split between this site and where the other 150 parking stalls would be provided within the Morris Street Garage. If we do see utilization levels as high as that approximately 250 stall supply, which would be provided between the garage on site and the Morris Street Garage as well. So we're breaking up that traffic, which is typically what you'd like to do within an urban downtown city environment, and dispersing that through the roadway network. And when we analyze the intersections of Livingston and George with New Street, both intersections that are under county jurisdiction, generally speaking, you find acceptable levels of service during the peak conditions. Those peak conditions are during the weekday. Generally speaking, they are from the hours of 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. during the morning, which is when you have your peak commuter rush times. And during the afternoon or evening period, your peak time is from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. So we've taken the trip generation associated with those proposed 186 units, the approximately 2,000 square feet of retail, and then we've weaved that through the roadway network, in particular, the two intersections. We are proposing, and we can simply do this through an email or correspondence with Middlesex County engineer with regard to the traffic signal timing, some reallocation, minimal reallocation of green time to what I would refer to as optimization of the traffic signals. I think it's always helpful to constantly be looking at traffic signals, the volume flowing through them, as well as the timing, so potentially you can make them more efficient, and we've had other coordination with the county engineer in that regard, and we can certainly do that as part of this project as well. In terms of the trip generation of the site, we've, as I've mentioned, weaved that through the two intersections, and we would not expect there to be a significant impact in the traffic volume flow through these intersections during the peak conditions. With regard to parking, you've already heard testimony about the parking being provided for the site, both on-site and the amount that is committed at the Morris Street Garage through the parking authority. And when you combine those two parking supplies for the 186 units, that equates to a parking supply ratio of about 1.34 per unit. And so you've heard the actual utilization rates of both market rate and student housing, and that those are well under a 1-to-1 ratio at this time. You've also heard about the ability to adapt, and that's what a parking authority, such as this city's parking authority, has the ability to do. When you have multiple garage locations, you can certainly adapt using policies and using the data that you have from everyday parking conditions. And that's what allows you to have somewhat of what we would call redundant measures in controlling both supply and demand associated with a project like this. There is a surplus of parking supply available, and that mostly results from the shared condition in which parking is used. Ideally, when we build anything, we like it to be utilized at all times, and by having the ability to share parking between office users, commuters, and then those residential parkers, you're able to more efficiently use land and use volume and use spaces within these buildings instead of having too much parking, which can cause issues within an urban environment such as this. More parking means generally more traffic, which means more congestion. In addition to that, when we look at the parking requirements that are put forth by the RSIS, there is a section within RSIS 4.14C which specifically refers to the fact that alternative parking standards can be considered by cities such as New Brunswick when you have different household characteristics, urban environment characteristics, and public transit. And within very close proximity to this site, you have very walkable and attractive areas that provide sense of place and destination. George Street, Rutgers University in close proximity. You have a train station which very efficiently runs during the peak and off-peak hours, which is not far from the site and has good pedestrian connectivity to this site as well. And those are exactly the conditions that you look for when you look at alternative parking standards. And generally speaking, a lot of the applications that I've testified before this board, we're looking at ratios anywhere from 1-to-1 or less to be able to provide for enough parking, but also to encourage people to use other means of transportation to travel, which they have here. If this was in the middle of suburbia or a rural area, you would not have the ability to effectively limit parking as you do here. But you have a very robust system of both bus, the 811, 814, 815, 818, as well as the M1 and the M5 Middlesex County shuttle lines that run through this area, as well as the train station in close proximity. The walkability, that public transit, that's why we see the use, the percentages in terms of the census data. About 34% of the people that live within this area do not own vehicles, and somewhere above 40% actually do not use a single occupancy vehicle during their journey to work. They're carpooling using bus, train, bicycle, and by providing 100 bicycle stalls as well as reducing the amount of parking, you're able then to shift the demand to other types, other modes of transportation, which is generally what we see here. So both from a traffic perspective and a parking perspective, the parking supply being provided on site, the commitment from the parking authority would be more than adequate to accommodate the expected demand that we have here, and the traffic associated with this project would not be expected to have significant impact on the roadway network proximate to the site.
I have no further questions. Mr. Lebo, who would wishes to address?
Are you taking questions from the
No,
public?
yeah, eventually, George.
Chuck, will the retail have access to the parking garage?
I think this type of retail here would be more of, based on the size, smaller, 2,000 square feet, would be akin to your neighborhood retail used by residents coming down from the elevator, or they could temporarily park on street in parking stalls.
So it'll be restricted to the residential users?
Yeah, there's approximately 5 parking stalls outside of the gated area on the site plan, which is going to be open to possible retail users as well as people coming to possibly look at leasing the building. It's a very limited amount of stalls, so it's not going to accommodate all of the retail parking, but will accommodate a decent portion. Sorry to jump out from this.
And have there been any issues making a left-hand turn from New Street into the Morris Street deck? Do you see any issues with queuing? Because you have a lot of...
Yes. The light stop bar for the traffic signal, the westbound approach, is located somewhere around 100 to 150 feet from the access point for the site itself. Then Morris Street Garage is just located essentially 30 to 40 feet away from that. You do see the occasional vehicles going in and out via left turn movements. The queue at the traffic signal itself upon green does clear through. And so the gaps in traffic from the signals on either side are really what's metering Morris Street and would do the same for our driveway as well.
Okay, so you don't anticipate that any significant...
No.
Okay.
No, accident history here over the last 5 to 10 years is rather minimal.
Okay, good.
Just so I understand, and I think I got this right, that the information that you provided that indicates that, I think you said something like 30 to 40% of the residences here in surrounding units here or nearby units are not using vehicles. That's actual data, that's not like predictive modeling?
No, that is census data for the entire city of New Brunswick, yes.
The
That is
entire-
empirical, surveyed, collected data.
What about these, similar residences that serve students nearby? Do you have any data from those?
No, it's often challenging to get the private data from the actual residential complexes themselves. We've gathered access to about 6 different projects within New Jersey, because what we're finding is that a lot of projects have been built with parking levels that are empty overnight, 2-3 floors of parking. And when developers build 2-3 floors of parking at about $40,000 a parking stall that are vacant, they're often now looking to either adapt that to habitable use by actually making it apartments because they don't need it, but they also want to understand how much do we really need, rather than what the requirement is, how much do we need. And we found ratios that vary from 0.6 per unit to around 1 to 1. And so we would assume that these projects would fall in a similar range. I believe Mitch talked about a 0.5 per unit for some of the other residential product within the city. And many of the projects in New Jersey are falling within that range.
I think if I heard Mitch correctly, and if I'm wrong, let me know. Rockoff has one, which would be probably your best comp.
Yes.
186 apartments, and you have 100 monthly users there?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I mean, we have 186 projected apartments, right? So probably our best similar comparison to student housing.
Agreed.
Does the other complex that you're referencing, this has a lot of 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom units. Is that similar to what's there?
Question, I don't know.
I'm not certain either, like the split
I can
Rockoff.
answer that one. Rockoff is 186 units. Most, but not all, of the units there, I believe, are, they're either 2-bedroom units with double occupancy in all of the bedrooms, or they're 4-bedroom units. I forget which. I believe there's approximately 4 occupants per apartment over there. This project is with the 5 bedrooms. They are designed with single occupancy bedrooms, so it's not 10 people in an apartment. It's 5, and they have some of the smaller units. And I'll let them answer, but I believe your smaller 2-bedroom units allow for double occupancy of the bedrooms. I believe. So they're sort of similar.
Any further questions to Mr. Levo? Not?
is the public going to be
Yeah.
able to ask questions after everyone is finished?
Absolutely. This time I will call Mr. Greg Woodard for testimony.
Can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name, please?
Gregory Woodruff, last name is spelled W-O-O-D-R-U-F-F.
And do you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
I do.
Mr. Woodard, you're a licensed professional planner of the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
Correct.
In that capacity, you have been asked to provide a planning analysis with regard to the variances that are being sought this evening.
Correct.
Could you give the board the benefit of your professional qualifications and experience?
Sure. As Mr. Kelso said, I'm a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey, as well as nationally with the American Institute of Certified Planners. I'm a senior project manager at Langen Engineering and Environmental Services. Been licensed for about 10 years now, a little less than 10 years. Been before this board before, as well as many other boards throughout the state.
And your credentials are...
Thank you.
Mr. Woodruff, if you could then, as a professional planner, we've asked you to consider the variances that are being requested this evening, and again, there are two. The parking variance being the one most discussed, but also with regard to the existing lot depth variance. If you could you give us your analysis of that, those requests, and the conclusions that you reach with regard to supporting of those variances, hopefully, and how you went about doing it?
Sure. So, as in any planning investigation on a project of this size, or any project, review the relevant background planning documents for the site and the city overall, the zone, visited the site and the surrounding area, reviewed the project documents, met with the project team, to help form the conclusion in deference to the municipal land use law and the criteria for justifying bulk variances, which, as this board is well aware, either falls under the C1 criteria or the C2 criteria. So I'll be using that sort of typical terminology, whether or not the variance falls under the C1 criteria for some unique attribute of the site that prevents compliance, or if there is a benefit that outweighs any detriment or perceived detriment that would justify the variance. And in both cases, I'll be talking about whether or not there's a substantial detriment to the public good or a substantial impairment to the intent or purpose of the zoning plan. So in going through all of that research and with that sort of criteria background in mind, the two variances that we're here to talk about, the first being the lot depth, the minimum lot depth, as has been described, I think, at 2 or 3 different points of the presentation. The lot depth is an existing nonconformity, so no matter what development were proposed here, that lot is just 84 feet deep, whereas the code requires 100 feet. So clearly that's just a unique attribute of the site that would prevent compliance because the lot is the depth that it is. Relative to substantial detriment to the public good or substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan, clearly 84 feet compared to 100 feet is not a dramatic differential. It's an existing condition that's been on this lot and really I think is just being addressed by the overall urban character of this downtown area and how the building fits onto the site. And hopefully, as everyone agrees in looking at the renderings, the building fits within what's going on in the overall redevelopment in the neighborhood in this area. The second variance that's before us here is the parking variance, and we obviously just heard quite a bit of testimony and discussion relative to the parking variance, the number of spaces that are being proposed versus what the code would calculate as being required. In my mind, from a planning perspective, this is a scenario where the variance that's being sought would be justified under that C2 criteria, whereby the benefits outweigh the detriments. And in my opinion, in looking at this from a planning perspective, the benefits are all of the things that we've heard about relative to a highly dense urban environment with quite a bit of mass transit access, both local, hyper-local in terms of some campus shuttle options, city bus options, regional rail options in close proximity. And then I think in today's day and age, the other factor that we all really have to start considering is the shared economy of services like Uber, Lyft, and things like that. Some of these things are hard to quantify until you hear statistics like the parking authority is able to provide in terms of what they were expecting and what they're seeing and how that is really a right sizing that's happening in real time. And how do we factor that into the planning decisions that we're making moving forward and help us utilize facilities that have been already built and maybe the expected demand on them continues to go down while the resource continues to be the size it was to start out with. So I think like Mr. Kelso described from a planning perspective, if that is the trend that we're seeing from a quantitative perspective, from a planning perspective, projects like this can help be part of the solution to utilize that infrastructure that was invested in previously. So from the perspective of all those things, to me, the benefits here of all of that urban, or uniquely urban attribute that surrounds this site is really what makes the parking that's being proposed work for this site. The number of spaces that are being proposed internal to the building, as we've heard statistically, based on sort of the best comps that are out there, is right on line with what we could expect to be utilized in the building. And then there's obviously capacity that's been dedicated in a building right next door to the one we have here. Relative to any substantial detriment to the public good or substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan, obviously, parking standards are intended to make sure there's enough parking. One of the limitations of the RSIS calculation for parking is that it does apply, as we heard Mr. Olivo testify to, it does apply to a variety of uses in a variety of different regions. And we all know that this issue can be hyper-local to the environment. So, that flexibility, that's why the municipal land use law provides that flexibility so that local jurisdictions can understand those hyper-local conditions and react to them in making decisions. I don't know that we could get better, more hyper-local data than we're getting here from the parking authority, and the precedent for buildings just like this that are in extremely close proximity to it. So from the perspective of evaluating will there be a substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan or substantial detriment to the public good, I would argue that with all the best data we have, I don't believe that conclusion could be reached. So I think in closing, relative to these two variances, in my opinion, in the one case, there are clearly some unique attributes of the site. It's only 84 feet deep currently, and relative to the parking variance, there are clear benefits that outweigh the detriment. So in my opinion, the two variances that are being sought have met the proof standard, are warranted, and can be granted by the board.
Thank you. That completes our presentation.
Mr. Chairman, we just have one clarification of the planner, if you can ask that if there are any purposes of the municipal land use laws that are advanced.
Yeah, that's true.
In my opinion, the purpose that would be advanced is just that there be appropriate locations for appropriate development types, and clearly I think this is the appropriate location for this type of development.
Thank you.
Public comment. Anyone?
Ron George.
For the public? Yes. I own the property with my wife at 83 Lawrence Street.
Just take your sworn in and he's not testifying as an order.
I have questions there. I
Raise your right hand and state your name, spell your last name for me, please, George.
want to hear. George Gussis, 83 Morris Street.
And do you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
Pardon?
Do you swear to tell the truth in this
I
matter?
do, yes. I'd like to ask the traffic person questions. I would like to know if you looked at the traffic study that was done for the entertainment center that's going to open on Livingston Avenue in close proximity to George Street.
The Cultural Center?
Yes.
Yes.
And did you determine the impact of the traffic that that's going to generate on this intersection?
No, but they did it as part of their study.
I'm not interested in what they did. You're testifying, and that's an existing project that's being constructed now. Yours isn't being constructed now. So did you take that into consideration? Did you look at their traffic study?
We did.
And so tell me what the impact is of this project considering the traffic that that's going to generate.
I see. With both of those projects overlaid on the two intersections that we studied, that's your
Both of
question.
which projects?
The Cultural Center and our project.
Yes.
We've looked at both of those.
Okay, so tell me what traffic is going to be generated by the cultural center that's going to affect the project that you're going to do when New Street is only 45 feet wide.
Correct. There is no widening of New Street proposed, but there would be volume associated with the Cultural Center project, new volume associated with our project as well, that would travel through the two intersections, and we did not find a significant change in the level of service of those two intersections.
How could that be possible?
Well, it could be possible because we're within an urban environment where you don't have everything related to vehicular use. you have walking traffic, you have bicyclist traffic, you have public transit, and so that you're not looking exactly at a one-to-one as you would in, say, a suburban area if you were to build those two projects right next to each other.
That project, the entertainment center, is not going to be a local project alone. It's going to bring people from all over the state. So you're telling me that that project is not going to impact on this intersection when New Street is only 45 feet wide?
Correct, that's what I'm saying.
So now, did you take into account the Matrix project called the Quincy that hasn't opened yet with 400 and some units?
We took into account whatever information was provided to us by the city. Whether the Quincy, I'll just say that the Quincy, the cultural center, those projects on their own prepare traffic studies to assess whether or not they alter the levels of service. Our charge, as being the traffic engineer for this project, is to look at all the projects, the ambient growth, the background growth, as well as site-specific projects like you mentioned, with the information provided to us, and our project, whether or not they impact the intersections.
What information did you seek? Did you actually see the traffic study for the Quincy and for the entertainment center?
We received a document with counts conducted by VHB. It's called a NEPA document, which includes a number of studies, the cultural center being one of those studies. Whether the Quincy was in there, I don't recall, but there is other growth associated with the numbers that we've used within the study.
So the in and out from the parking garage that you're going to have, how does it impact on the garbage trucks going into the Heldridge that block all of New Street when they use it?
Well, Heldridge has a loading zone on the north side of New Street. Whether they're using that or not operationally is really very little to do with this project, but how would our project impact them? It would not.
Well, tell me the hours that you conducted your traffic study. Did you just read reports or did you actually go there in the field and look at it?
We conducted it on 2 different occasions, January and September, from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. We looked at it.
Well, what about during the day?
That is when the volumes are generally lower than they are during the commuter peaks.
Are you aware that New Street is the corridor that goes to the family court at 120 New Street that generates traffic all day long, 5 days a week?
There's no question that it generates traffic all day long.
Well, I know that. I'm not
Peaks,
Sherlock Holmes to be able to say that, but did you take it into consideration?
it's a softer peak than the morning and the evening.
What do you mean a softer peak?
It's a lesser peak. There's lesser volume in the roadway.
How could it possibly be when the hours of the court are from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night?
Because the court is a low generator compared to all the other generators that generate their peak traffic from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to
But
7 p.m.
you can generalize and give all these statistics that you've given today, but you have not made them specific to our issues here in the city.
The items that we've discussed are actually specific. Some of the items I have spoken about are generalities, but the intersections that we counted, the movements that we counted at these subject intersections are very specific.
But you only did it on a very short period of time.
I wouldn't say that. I
How
disagree.
not? You said 2 days, right? With short periods of time?
Not short periods of time. I wouldn't say they would be short periods of
Well,
time.
tell me what you consider a long period of time that you did.
5 hours.
5 hours.
Yes.
5 hours for a project that's going to generate this much traffic?
I would generally say that this project would generate low levels of traffic based on where it is. When you look at DOT and other city standards, typically they look at a threshold of about 100 peak hour trips as being a significant generator of traffic. And based on what's being proposed, we have 91 peak hour trips, so we're underneath that threshold. With that being said, we've still studied the peak conditions, which I would argue is generally an
5
extensive
hours.
period of time, yes.
Okay, so did you also go on Morris Street?
We counted the 2 intersections that I mentioned.
Okay,
New at
you-
Livingston and George,
Are
no,
you aware that Morris is 30 feet wide?
I am.
Have you seen cars coming out of that garage that cannot make a left turn without going into the right lane, and Morris Street is a one-way street?
I've seen cars make turns out of the garage. Some stay within the leftmost lane, some do not.
Do you notice that the parking authority stations a car at the far end of the parking deck so that people can have an easy time getting out of the parking garage?
I did not notice that, no.
Well, you were only there for 5 hours.
I would say we spent
I'm
a good
there
amount
for
of time.
14 hours a day. Okay, I have nothing on that. Now, with regard to the engineer and the drainage, I would like to be certain that the drainage system that's going to be in the top of the building has been approved by our engineer on behalf of the city, that it's going to be adequate so that no drainage comes down on my side of Morris Street, which, as you know, is a slope down from New Street. So I would like some confirmation of that, because I only heard a generality by Mr. Roche.
Well, we've made that representation in the record, and we made it to George off the record when we met with him. But obviously, what's being represented with regard to zero runoff on the property has to be confirmed by the sign off on the plans, otherwise we could never get a building permit. As George knows, having done more land use work than I have over the last 45 years.
Well, since, you know, we have the traffic study for 5 hours, the roof, somebody has to be able to tell us with the square footage on the roof what the water anticipation is. There must be statistics for that. And somebody has to have investigated the drainage system that they propose to make sure it's adequate. Because I do not want my property to be the drainage system for this building.
We've made that representation. The design is for zero runoff. It obviously has to be approved by the engineer, the reviewing engineer, and the city engineer, or we couldn't get a building permit, as he knows. But we made the representation to him on the record.
Ordinarily, the application has gone through the TAC process where the board's engineer and city engineer have reviewed it, and I don't believe there are any concerns about the system being inadequate. I believe they felt it was adequate. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know, sir, but it was not brought up as a point of contention. So, George, I think you should feel relatively comfortable that you're not going to have runoff onto your property, that stuff is going to be collected on the roof and go into their drainage system, then directly into the stormwater system. They're not intending to use any sheet runoff from the property.
George, if you want, I can walk you through calculations at a later date. I warn you, I'm the only person in this room who finds that exciting, though.
Any other comments?
Try to raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please.
Charles Cradiville, K-R-A-T-O-V-I-L.
And you spoke the truth in this matter.
Yes, sir.
Please proceed.
Good evening, members of the board. Thanks for the opportunity to address you. I wanted to ask, it was alluded to that the redevelopment authority signed off on this. I was there on November 15th, and my first question is for Mr. Kelso. Isn't it true that at that meeting where the redevelopment authority, which should be known as also the housing authority, approved the resolution signing off on this, isn't it true that the public was not given a chance to comment on that resolution or ask questions?
I don't recall that. I don't recall that.
Did any members of the public ask questions or
You did.
about this project in
When the
November
concept plan,
15th?
no. When the concept plan was approved and the designation of the redeveloper was approved in May, you asked a number of questions.
That's correct, but in November, when they
Well,
came back with less parking spaces and more units, and they got the
No, that's-
housing authority sign off on it, and there was a crowd of 30-plus people there, did the redevelopment authority allow those members of the public to ask questions or provide input on this?
The purpose of that meeting was to approve a document, the redevelopment agreement. And the representation on the record comparing the concept from May to November was the change of one unit, okay? And I believe 10 or 12 spaces, okay?
And there was a
And
resolution.
we made the
yes.
representation to the board that that's what was in the document. Not only did I make it, but counsel to the redevelopment authority indicated to the board what modest, minuscule changes were made to the concept plan. The board originally approved the concept plan in May, which set forth all the figures, and then in November they confirmed it. That's what occurred.
And in November, they passed a resolution confirming it, correct?
No, the resolution approving the concept plan was in May. The resolution in November was to approve the redevelopment agreement. Let's be specific.
Okay, so the redevelopment agreement was approved?
Yes.
At the November meeting?
That's
Thank you
correct.
for clarifying. And just, Mr. Kelso surely would know as the county's attorney that it's a best practice to open the floor to the public before a resolution's passed, correct?
Well, typically, that would be the case, true.
Okay. Well, I think that the Housing Authority is not following best practices, to say the least. Can you please ask Mr. Kelso if his client intends to request or apply for a long-term tax exemption for this project?
Yes, it's a redevelopment project, yes.
Okay, so...
There already is one that's been approved for the previous project, and it will follow the same pattern.
So they'd have to go back, though, and the
Yes.
council would have to approve it again?
Yes.
Okay, I may have asked this back in May, but in case it changed, I wanted to know what the approximate rents will be on these units.
Can you give an answer, Jason?
Sure. Yeah, they'll be anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 per bedroom.
Okay, so like 5 bedrooms, you could be talking as much as 10,000?
It's per bedroom per month is the rent, so it's based on the different unit types.
Okay. Mr. Dornbos alluded to a construction partner. Can we know who the construction partner is that would be handling this?
Construction partner?
He said something about a construction partner?
Yeah, I was referring to the general contractor, and our plan is to use Gilbane, whose offices are about a block or two from the subject site.
Total occupancy, is there a number? I understand the 5-bedroom units are going to be only 5 max, but some of the 2 bedrooms I heard might be double occupancy.
I think the total occupancy is somewhere around 680.
680 approximately, thank you. It was alluded to that some of these units, the top 3 floors, would be market rate. Isn't it true that all of the units in this building are going to be market rate?
That's correct. The terminology was meant to say to the general marketplace rather than to the undergraduate market.
That's what I figured.
There's no differentiation in the rent.
Right. And so the number of parking spaces is now 100, but there might be more?
The rationale for that is we've asked for the variance assuming 100 spaces, but it actually shows 105, but the concern is that when they're done with PSE&G, the location of the transformer may take some of those spaces. So there could end up being 105, but right now we're making the assumption of 100 because we didn't want to make the assumption of 105 and end up being short.
And so the parking authorities committed 150 spaces in the adjacent or the nearby Morris Street deck. What was the original number that they had committed for the previous project?
Previous project,
Yeah.
I believe it was 125.
Gotcha. And hypothetically, not that I expect this to happen, but if, let's say, the parking authority sold the deck to somebody else, would the new owners be bound by that agreement that the parking authority made, or would they be able to revoke it and change it and not provide those 150?
I don't know that scenario really needs to be answered because having a public parking garage being sold to a private entity is highly unlikely. But the answer is if it ever came to that point, we would confirm that commitment before because it's needed. Parking would be needed.
So who would confirm the commitment?
The developer with the parking authority would be a condition of any sale.
Can we hear from the parking authority about that? So long as Mitch is in charge, they won't, they'll make that a condition of any sale. That's all the questions I have. I want to, wish everybody luck with the project, and I wish I could afford to live there, but I can't. So, God bless. Have a good one.
Any other public comment?
Can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please?
Michael Sisler, S-I-S-L-E-R.
And you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
I do. So I have a couple of questions with regards to the occupancy. We heard, is it 688 beds? Is the total?
682.
Okay, during the, 682. During the testimony, both the developer and the architect seemed to indicate that all the bedrooms were going to be singles. But then when Glenn was talking about the 2-bedroom units, it seemed to indicate that some of them would be double bedrooms.
Yeah, to
So-
clarify, there are certain of the 2s and the 4s that can
Max
have.
of 5 is what it meant. If there's a 5-bedroom unit, the max will be 5 individuals living in there.
Okay, so what about the 4-bedroom unit?
The max would be 5 still. There's like,
So there's a double bedroom in the 4.
some of the 4s, not all of them. There's a few 4s. We have multiple unit types. Some of the 4s and some of the 2-bedroom units have some of the double occupancy.
Okay, so we have 688 units with 100 parking spaces being provided by the developer, which I think is,
682, so that's, sorry, the 682 is, that's how many people will live there max. That includes any of their bedrooms that are double occupied.
all right, so 682 potential occupants with 100 parking spaces being provided by the developer, which is a 0.15.
Well,
To-
the testimony is there's 100 on site and then 150, 60 feet down on the street at the Morris Street, right?
For comparison purposes, the last project that was approved here had a similar ratio. There were approximately 650 occupants in that building. There were 120 spaces in the garage and 125 from the parking authority, which was approved by the parking authority.
Okay, so I understand that I think a big part of this program is to use the public parking spaces as part of the application to get the approval, since not enough parking is being provided on site. So that makes sense to me, but I just wanted to make sure that I understood, and I guess the planning board understands, that we're really talking about providing 100 parking spaces for 688 beds,
Right.
not 168 doors, because it's not really market rate housing, it's a student developer and student housing. So is part of this application stipulating that, all those 5 bedrooms are only single bedroom units?
Well, they would be restricted by code because they're designed so you couldn't put more than one person in them.
And there is actually a code requirement, I think, that limits the number of unrelated occupants to 5.
I'm not aware of that code requirement.
That's my understanding, but they are, maybe I'm incorrect on that.
I think Mr. Dornbach, I'm guessing, I think Mr. Dornbach was talking about the common area requirement.
Yes.
Yeah. That, he can't get the 6, but you need extra common area when you get to get the 6 to 10 person occupancy. And I don't think he has that. That's under the housing code, that's not the zoning.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
But I think that's what he's going for, but,
The maximum we could do
That's-
is
So long as it's under the housing code, Glenn, I want to make sure I understand this. We don't really have to talk about it in front of the zoning code, because I feel like there's sometimes conflicts there between housing and zoning.
It's a housing.
Right.
The square footage is right.
But we don't have to talk about zoning issues so long as housing is.
that's not an issue for site plan review, but if you're asking about occupancy of that particular unit, I mean, obviously there are other different codes that apply. They have to comply with the UCC code, they have to comply with the property maintenance code and so forth. But how many people fit in the unit itself is not necessarily an issue for site plan approval. It is an issue in terms of parking and traffic and things like that you brought up. But the number of people that kind of fit in the unit in and of itself, how much common area there is, that's a housing code issue.
Okay, I'm aware of that. In terms of this area of development, I mean, we have the Heldrick Hotel and those fairly high-end condominiums, the George, and those fairly high-end apartments, and now the cultural center that's being built. Rockoff Hall was built quite a long time ago, but it brings a high level of concentration of students to that area, an area that's not really a student housing area. It's not on Douglas or Cook, and it's not at the College Avenue campus. This is an additional concentration of another 688 students in this area. Is this what the zoning board wants to state, this concentration
I
of
would object
students?
to that because this is a permitted use. So, I mean, I think that's an inappropriate question to be asking a board of permitted use.
Well, this is the planning board, this isn't the zoning
The
board.
planning board.
The zoning board, that's a legit question because then it involves a use variance.
Right.
Here, it's a permitted use, what they are proposing. They are asking for a parking variance, and is being provided, so it is certainly an issue for the board to consider. But the type of use, it is permitted.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, if the board seeks to make a positive recommendation, this has a number of conditions that should be considered. And Mr. Eitel, should we discuss that the applicant has requested that the board consider adopting the resolution tonight?
Mr. Chairman, the applicant has requested that if the board finds favorably, or if the board denies the application, that either the adoption of the resolution of acceptance or of denial be adopted this evening. In anticipation of that, I have drafted a resolution, and depending on how the vote goes, I'll read into the record the proposed resolution which the board can act on tonight.
Is this?
One of the reasons that the applicant has requested this relates to some of the things that Mr. Cradaville was referring to with the redevelopment authority actions. They were not able to meet when they originally said they were going to meet. I believe they didn't have a quorum, so they got pushed off. And if I don't want to get too far out there, Mr. Kelso, for the reasoning on it and so forth. Our understanding is the applicant's request, because they are generally a student housing developer,
Okay.
you can't open a student housing project in November. You need to have it done in August, so you're there for a September opening. They have a construction schedule that they're trying to accomplish. So it's, if you don't hit this schedule, you're delayed a year. So they requested if the board could consider doing this. It has been done before. It is not something that we normally do, and not something that we recommend as a regular practice, but because of the delay that the housing authority had, because they had a lack of a quorum, it did push this back. But it's the board's decision.
Again, just on behalf of the applicant, it was actually several months that we lost with regard to the inability to get before the housing authority, and that really has put a real serious strain on the ability to move a schedule. Obviously, if you're not favorably inclined to the application, then it's mooted, but we do ask for the accommodation, and it's been done, as Glenn's indicated, it's been done under similar circumstances in the past, but we're just trying to make up for that time lost with the authority.
The only additional thing that I'd add is that I'm concerned with whether the municipal land use law permits this sort of thing or prohibits it. And it does not prohibit it. It does in fact permit the resolutions to be adopted in the same evening.
Okay. I don't have an objection. Okay. It's fine.
Chairman, suggest the following conditions. In compliance with the terms of the DNR engineering report dated December 8, 2017, submission of all necessary easements and cross-access agreements for review and approval by the board attorney and city engineer prior to the filing of same. Payment of a site performance bond, an amount to be reviewed and approved by the city engineer. Submission of a site inspection escrow deposit for engineering inspection fees, an amount to be calculated pursuant to Title 1624-160. Payment of all water and sewer connection fees pursuant to Titles 1304 and 1308. Issuance of road opening permit from the city engineer. Compliance with the terms of the Big Nell Consulting Group report dated December 7, 2017. Payment of a redeveloper fee, if applicable, to the city of New Brunswick. Mandatory monetary contribution to the city's tree preservation trust fund, an amount to be required as per Title 8.48. Planning review escrow funding for all anticipated post-approval reviews. Payment of any other fees due to the city of New Brunswick related to development or use of the project. Payment of all outstanding taxes and water and sewer fees. Middlesex County Planning Board or waiver. Freehold Soil Conservation District approval or waiver. Submit engineering site plan to comply with any changes required by the planning or engineering memos or plan amendments offered at the hearing. Submit architectural plans to comply with any changes required by the planning and engineering memos and plan amendments offered at the hearing. All utilities and other site improvements maintained by the applicant at their sole expense. All on-site utilities will be constructed underground. All temporary encroachment of the public right-of-way shall require city council approval. All construction segments shall be done on-site. Thus, encroachment allowing for the same to the public right-of-way is approved by city council. The street should be kept clear of sediment and debris. The applicant shall cause the streets to be cleaned, directed to do so by the Director of Public Works. Tracking pads shall be installed at all construction exits. Replacement of damaged streets, curb, and sidewalks per the direction of the city engineer. The applicant will provide an executed agreement with New Brunswick Parking Authority regarding the availability of 150 parking spaces at the Morris Street deck. And the applicant will agree to put those assist buttons on the doors by the elevator where the bicycles will be going up. And as discussed, they're asking for two variances for the parking and the lot depth, and the two design waivers related to the parking aisle width and parking stall width.
I make a motion to approve the application. Can we do the motion and the resolution at the same time, or do we need to do it separate? Then a motion to approve the application based on the conditions enumerated by Glenn.
Second.
Dale Vickers. John Petrolino.
Yes?
Manny Castaneda.
Yes.
Bob Cardica.
Yes.
Suzanne Ludwig.
Yes.
Dave Fitzhenry.
Yes.
Jeff Crum.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if the board wishes to adopt a resolution of approval this evening, I have drafted a resolution of approval, which I can read into the record. This is City of New Brunswick Planning Board order and resolution for site plan and variance application approval, whereas standard at New Brunswick LLC 305 Oconee Street, Athens, Georgia 30606. The applicant seeks approval of its preliminary and final site plan application with variances to construct a 21-story mixed-use building at 90 New Street, New Brunswick, and whereas the applicant requests approval to construct a multi-story building with residential and commercial space resulting in the request of approval of certain variances to it, minimum lot depth, which is an existing variance, and minimum off-street parking, and whereas the and design waivers for parking space size and garage drive aisle width, whereas the applicant has requested the City of New Brunswick Planning Board approve its preliminary and final site plan application with variances to permit the proposed development of Lot 5.01, Block 129, the City of New Brunswick tax map upon property more commonly known as 90 New Street, New Brunswick. The hearing was held before the Planning Board on December 11th, at which time the applicant was represented by Thomas F. Kelso, Esquire, and evidence was presented through the testimony of Jason Dornbose, Executive Vice President of Development for applicant's parent company, Landmark Properties Incorporated, Mitch Karen, Executive Director of New Brunswick Parking Authority, Christian Roche, professional engineer, Charles Olivo, professional engineer in the area of traffic, John Triber, professional architect, and Greg Woodruff, licensed professional planner. Live testimony and certain documents, including exhibits A1 through A12 in support of the application, were presented by the applicant and accepted and duly considered by the board. Members of the public in attendance were given an opportunity to comment and or provide testimony. And whereas the planning board has made the following findings of fact and determinations. 1, the subject area is located in the downtown development district renewal area. 2, the proposed site consists of a single tax lot within the downtown development district redevelopment plan, upon which there are currently 2 buildings and an asphalt parking area. The applicant proposes to demolish the existing structures and construct a 21-story building with 186 furnished residential units, 2,000 square feet of ground floor retail space, and a minimum of 100 parking stalls in the parking garage. 3, applicant seeks certain variances to wit minimum lot depth, which is existing, and minimum off-street parking, and also design waivers for parking space size and garage drive aisle width. 4, applicant appeared before this board as the designated redeveloper for the project. 5, applicant proposes to construct all proposed and required improvements consistent with the submitted preliminary and final site plan prepared by Kristen Roach, professional engineer of Langen Engineering, dated July 27th, 2017, with a final revision date of October 27th, 2017, and floor plan and elevations prepared by Jack Borman, registered architect of BVK Group, dated October 26th, 2017, as both may be revised consistent with the decision of the board. Paragraph 6, the board finds that the applicant is the designated developer for the project and the proposed development is consistent with the downtown development District Redevelopment Plan. The board further finds that the Housing Authority, acting as the redevelopment agency, has approved the concept plan for this project and that the application is in substantial compliance with the approved concept plan. Paragraph 7, the board finds that the variance for minimum lot depth can be granted under the C1 hardship analysis of the municipal land use law, and that the lot depth is an existing condition that is unique to this site. Paragraph 8, the board finds that the variance for the minimum required parking spaces can be granted under the flexible C2 analysis of municipal land use law, in that the anticipated need for the parking is consistent with the site located in an urban environment with the multiple public and private transportation alternatives available, and if required, an additional 150 spaces are available through a formal arrangement with the adjacent New Brunswick Parking Authority facility. Paragraph 9, the board finds that the applicant has demonstrated that the proposed development for the property and the variances can be granted without substantial detriment to public good, and that the proposed development is consistent with or complementary to the other structures and uses in the immediate area. Paragraph 10, the board finds that the application for the requested variances and waivers can be granted without substantial detriment to the city's zone plan, master plan, and public good. In paragraph 11, the board finds that the proposed development of the property advances purposes I of the municipal land use law and promotes a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques and good civic design and arrangement. The 24 conditions have been read previously by Mr. Patterson. I can reread them if the board wishes, but they're the same conditions. The board wishes to adopt the resolution with those findings of facts and conclusions of law and the 24 conditions prior read into the record. That would be the proposed resolution tonight.
Move to adopt the resolution?
Second.
Dale Vickers,
Yes.
John Petrolino,
Yes.
Manuel Castaneda,
Yes.
Bob Cardigan,
Yes.
Suzanne Ludwig,
Yes.
David Henry,
Yes.
Jeff Crum.
Yes.
Thank you, members of the board.
Other matters of interest to the public?
Good evening, members of the board. Charles Prattville once again. I know it's been a long night. I have two quick announcements I wanted to share with everybody. I'm glad we got to touch on the dysfunction of the New Brunswick Housing Authority and how it's not only hurting the residents of public housing in the city, but it's actually hurting redevelopment efforts. And I think it's the biggest and most important issue in our city, and so I'd like to encourage anybody who's watching this or in the room today, and especially the board members, because you're community leaders here, to attend their next meeting, if they can get together a quorum to have it, on December the 20th at 6:45 p.m. at the Housing Authority headquarters, 7 Van Dyke Avenue. The more the merrier. It's really important that people hold them accountable because they are clearly having problems, and it's hurting people. So I hope that some of you can make it to that. And the other announcement is, touches on the public transportation and how important that is to these redevelopment efforts. It's often mentioned at these meetings as a good reason to build these projects, because there is I've heard the word robust tossed around, public transit system. And so I've been looking into the buses and how the current system could potentially be improved and enhanced. And so I'll be making a presentation at the New Brunswick Traffic Commission meeting. I'm sure Mr. Patterson's looking forward to it. He's a member of that board.
It's going to be the highlight of 2018.
So it will be at their first meeting in 2018. That's January 4th. It might be a little hard to get to. It's at 1:30 p.m. But if you're available, please come and listen to what I have to say, and please provide input on how we can make our city a better and more connected place where people can get to where they need to go. So thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.
Thank you. Any other matters of interest?
Thank you.
And then hearing none, we got a motion to adjourn. Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.